Okay, thank you. Bonsoir. Before I begin, I want to give a bit of background. This may be teaching and speaking to the converted, but I think it's always important whenever we're talking about analytics and data to try and step back a little bit. It's very easy to become focused on one very small aspect of a project rather than actually what you're trying to get done. So firstly, the web is littered with abandoned baskets. People come on to use e-commerce websites, retail sites in general, and then leave. The vast majority of websites suffer from this. And indeed, if we try to compare the digital aspects to offline industries, online performs very, very badly indeed. Typically only reaching maybe 1% to 2% if you're lucky. So the vast majority of online marketing budgets are entirely wasted. When people come onto a website, people become aware of your brand, of your company, and what you may sell. They'll then consider whether they want to work with you, want to buy products from you. Marketing tends to be focused in these areas of acquiring traffic or visitors coming to the site, in the retail world as well. Customers will then browse around the website, consider products, consider the service they may have, and understand what's there. This we can control by looking at the site content itself, looking at how we can optimize it, and this is where usability, user experience really pays dividends. Further on, you then want to, once you have a customer, you want them to repeat their purchases. Ideally, you want them to repeat purchases more often and be spending more with you, and I'll talk a little bit about this later. And this is an area which is often underused in terms of retention marketing. So before talking any further, I thought it was mentioning that one of the key things that I always advocate is the customer. This is a rather atypical customer, so my apologies for a very, very typically British customer, if you will. But making sure that any consideration for any work that you put forward here, it's understanding the customer who is actually paying all of your wages at the end of the day. So there's a couple of key questions whenever we start to try and build a foundation of linking together voice of customer, customer relationship management systems and analytics, is understanding who visits the site, who are your customers, why do they want to come to your website in the first place, what do they want to do when they actually get there, and how are they using your websites. We have a variety of techniques that we can use at our disposal to do this. In the digital world, it's quite different from the standard offline retail world, where we can have in-store surveys, mystery shoppers, and so forth. The digital aspect does make this a slightly abstracted aspect. So for me, the three main data sources that I tend to recommend are obviously web analytics. They provide the what and the how of what's coming onto the website. What they won't tell you is the who. They're simply a transactional record of what's happening on site. So bringing in customer relationship management systems to actually understand who your customers are can become vital. Lastly, voice of customer and online surveys is a much underused tool and technique. The reason for this is it tends to be deployed terribly badly, and as a consequence, it gets very, very bad press. In the UK, there is a big retailer called Homebase. They launched a survey in the best will in the world from a very important and prestigious supplier, but they launched the survey in the middle of their checkout process. It was an overlay, which meant you couldn't use the checkout process at all until you completed the survey. So they had a whole bunch of customers wanting to buy things. They were going through the process and then asked them about their experience. Now, if you think about that, you can imagine that the experience wasn't particularly good because they couldn't buy the products that they wanted to do. Furthermore, they had to complete a 40-question survey taking 25 minutes before they could actually do anything else. So what do? They went to B&Q, a competing store, to buy a comparable product. These things happen all the time. So putting yourself in the shoes of your customer is absolutely vital. So one of the aspects of understanding surveys, how do you approach this? Firstly, looking at the site experiences. There are aspects of entry surveys. So when somebody comes onto the website, you can ask them what their intent was. Why did they come onto the website in the first place? Trying to understand a bit about them, their profile, the demographics, age, gender, their wishes, and so forth. Trying to understand what their expectation is. What do they expect to be able to do on the website? And then finally, bringing this into a multi-visit journey. If you look at things like holiday plans or high-value purchases, someone isn't going to come onto a website and buy a cruise holiday on their first visit. They'll want to find out additional ideas, additional details about the trip, possibly talk to their other half about it, coordinate. So it's a multi-journey as they go through. Lastly, you can also ask people at an exit survey. So when they've completed their journeys, what happens? How can they move forwards? One of the reasons of integrating with analytics is that what people say and what they actually do can be entirely two different things. So for example, people may say that 1/3 of them intend to buy something on the website. Compare that to the actual conversion rates that you see on the site, completely different. So this is where we start to talk about why you want to integrate. So for yourselves, think about if you own companies, retail companies and so forth, do you actually know who your customers are? Do you have a process to actively listen to them? Do you know what they think of you as a brand and as the products that you provide? And are your changes that you make to the website driven by your own internal intentions, or are they driven by what your customers actually want? And ultimately, this, I don't know how well this translates, but it's best to try and avoid the customer being screwed as they go through from here. So, integrating with analytics. Integrating with CRM systems, the advantage nowadays, and when Roman and I first worked on one of the projects, this wasn't the case, but nowadays, many systems provide out-of-the-box integrations, which can be very helpful. Common approaches are to capture a user identifier, pass that into your analytics system, so you can start integrating data directly there. You can selectively write out details from your customer relationship system into your analytics software as well, so you can get basic demographic information. Are they a new customer, for example, or a returning customer? How high a value is that particular customer? The key thing here is to make sure you are transparent. Privacy is a massive issue, and if you're advocating a customer-first policy, capturing all of your customer data and selling it to your suppliers, possibly not the best thing to do. So be very clear and transparent with the benefits of why you're doing this in the first place. Alternatively, look at integrating voice of customer and pushing it through. Again, many voice of customer providers now provide methods of pushing survey data into your analytics and pulling it through. Personally, I've worked with a range of tools, eDigital Research, Opinion Lab, SurveyMonkey, and SurveyGizmo, which my own survey platform is based off. Many of them will require some technical details to enable this, but API calls are making this much, much easier. So moving along, quick example. You can have your website, a basic invite layer that you can display, and there's a range of ways you can trigger this, not in the middle of your checkout process being one. I typically find that 5 questions is a great way of finding about 80% of what you need to do. Firstly, what was the reason for coming to the site? Task intent. Secondly, looking at were they able to do this? Yes, no, or partially. How easy did they find to do that particular process if they could complete it? And would they recommend it, and any other details? For anyone that's technical, this is the Google Universal Analytics code to implement it. It's probably easier if I just send it to anyone that's interested rather than go through the JavaScript, but if anyone wants to grab me after a few pints, I'll happily not discuss this. So, building a foundation. Having customer data at the heart of what you do is something you need to evangelize through the organizations. Having customer information with information coming through from marketing, customer services, analytics, and a variety of other systems is vital. I'll pass over to Nicolas now. I believe that's 10 minutes.
No, that's 8 minutes, actually.
8 minutes. Oh,
so
even earlier.
I think you can pick slower, maybe, for the audience.
You can tell I'm British. I'm waiting for the pint to come.
So we have, thank you very much. So we have a first question to Sean. First question gets 1 book. So Sean, you've chosen Voice of the Customer Marketing. So why did you choose this book?
I quite like this book. It's a good entry into why do you voice a customer in the first place. One of the things we'll talk about a little later is the difference between traditional voice of customer, strategic level data capture versus more operational tactical reporting. This particular one gives a nice 5-step process to introduce into things and gets a very good write-up on Amazon. So it's well worth having a look at.
So do we have one first question? Yes.
Hello, Sean.
Hello.
Do you offer a reward to customers to increase percentage of participation to the surveys you try to launch?
Sorry, can you just repeat?
I'm not sure you understand.
Sorry, it's a bit quiet from up here with the background noise.
So the question was regarding rewards. Do you provide rewards if people answer your surveys? How does it work?
So incentives are always a Yes, just for the book, fair enough. Rewards are always a slightly controversial aspect as to whether you'll skew the results. It really depends what you're trying to achieve. I would normally start off without and then look to see if the sample sizes that you're receiving are representative to your audience. Often, voice of customer, the sample rates are quite low. So by offering an incentive, you get a better return of customers coming through. But some people do just do it to get a prize at the end of it. So you need to take that into consideration when you analyze the data. So the rather cop-out answer is it does depend. Personally, I prefer not to give incentives, but that's a personal preference to an extent. Does that answer?
Well, it's your personal point of view, but it could be also stats that could be that could. I don't know how to say that, but statistics could say to you that incentive work better.
Yes, the answer is if you offer an incentive, you will get a higher response rate. But the simple truth is, are the data that you collect reliable? If people are only answering to get the incentive, you'll be skewing the results. So I would start off without, see if you get a suitably representative sample size, which it depends on your audience. We worked with a customer in the UK which had 26 million customers. So we were dealing with 13,000 responses a month without any incentive. That was quite enough to deal with to operationalize and use that data. So I would start off without. If you're finding you're struggling, then consider an appropriate incentive. But bear that in mind when you analyze the results.
Thank you. Do we have a second question? Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. Just a little question about we can use, I'm pretty sure we can use the user ID from Google Analytics plugged to the data for the CRM, right? But it's a little bit, it's legal completely to do that?
It's a good question with relation to privacy, and hence the question about being utterly transparent with your users. I would never advocate passing anything that was personally identifiable, but there is a unique between being personally identifiable and uniquely identifiable. If you have a CRM system, you have a customer, they have logged in, you can have terms and conditions related to their registering with you as a company. Therefore, passing a user ID, which should be something that isn't an email address, for example, it shouldn't be personally identifiable in that matter, but integrating can offer benefits to the customer, i.e. more tailored offers, a more tailored experience. In Europe, privacy is slightly different to privacy in the UK. In the UK, so far, no one has been prosecuted for privacy issues. I personally have always said that I think that's going to change rather rapidly. Some of the privacy practices are very business friendly and not customer friendly. I don't advocate that as an approach. I think that that's very naive and that customers will increasingly control that conversation. And if they find that a company is doing inappropriate things with their data, by selling their even name and address to a third party to send them detailed spam, they'll eventually cotton on who it was and leave that company. So it's all about the bigger picture, I would say.
Okay. Do you have another question? Yes.
Thank you for the conference.
You're welcome.
I have a question about the data system. What would happen, for instance, if I'd use my mobile device, for example, my smartphone, instead of a laptop or a computer? How do you monitor the transparency and the data on all the computers? How do you make sure there is privacy and that it's insured?
There are a variety of technical ways that you can link things together. Google Analytics itself now has, with Universal Analytics, ways of pulling data from multiple devices together. There are various systems out there that try to integrate this without a user logging in. I'm not a fan of any of those systems because of the privacy and transparency issues. So if somebody is on a laptop computer and they log in, you have a user identifier. If they're on their mobile device and they log in, you have a user identifier. You can link those two things together because someone has logged in. Equally, when someone logs out, there can be different grades of logging out. Are they leaving the website and coming back and so they can be welcomed, but they're not necessarily fully acknowledged, but you know who they are? The majority of devices are used by one person, for example. So you can make a judgment call in a business that actually, even though they haven't logged in this time, they haven't explicitly logged out, so you can still pass the user ID back. And then if they complete a transaction, you can ask for the username and password again at that point. And that would work well. It's very convenient for the user. They don't have to constantly remember their login details. I'm terrible with this. I can never remember anything. So as a consequence, I appreciate websites that do recognize me when I come back and help me to go through that process. So again, it comes back to transparency. If you give users an incentive to want to make their life easier, then it's of benefit to them to have that user ID. You provide tailored services and make it a seamless journey. For example, you could be walking to the train station, looking at something on your mobile phone. You add a product to the basket, but you don't want to do it on your phone because you've just got on the train. You go back to your desktop, you go onto the website, and that product is already there for you to purchase. That's convenient. It's a seamless process, and you can look at that journey by integrating it together. So you have to have the customer at the center of everything that you're doing. We're no longer barred by technology now.
Do we have a last question for this one? Yes.
In France, we have, in terms of e-privacy on data protection, we have Lille, which is...
Sorry, could you speak up a little? Sorry.
Okay. In France, we have Lille, which is very active in terms of data protection and the law regarding to the cookie usage. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know how could online businesses still compliant with all the tracking technology which are growing and increasing in the market, and how that could be a business advantage for them to be more transparent?
It's a good question. The honest truth is that I'll give you a stat from the UK to give you an idea of the difference between the European market and the UK market. We look to when originally the European Union brought in the cookie legislation, requiring that all users must consent to any cookie being set, with the language being they must consent before, during, or after, within a reasonable amount of time, any cookie being set. So all this came into effect a few years ago in the UK, in UK law. So all websites in the UK have to have a cookie message as well, stating that there's a compliance. We found by looking at the data and looking at the click-through rates that 97% of customers just clicked on the close button almost immediately after loading the page. They hadn't read anything on it. They just clicked close, not accept, just close. And that was considered enough of a acceptance to move forwards. In the UK, IP addresses, as an example, aren't classed as personally identifiable data, but in parts of Europe they are. It's still quite a grey area. Certainly in the UK, no one's been prosecuted. So until someone is, I think we won't have a legal case by which to know definitively. From my own standpoint as a consultant, I always advocate that you need to be transparent. You don't want to be the company that gets taken to court because your customers are suing you for privacy infringement. And again, I think that would be a general principle that should all be taken. So to specifically answer your question about all suppliers, the answer is no. Not all suppliers do conform to that. There are issues over data collection that's still being bashed out in Europe and how that differs in the UK. The market in the UK is quite large from a digital analytics perspective, and how that translates over into Europe, I think, is still evolving. There are some smaller players that are reticent to come into Europe because of these reasons. But again, advocating with the customer standpoint, how that's going to happen and how that impacts, the honest answer is I think companies are being sued, and that's probably to the detriment to the customer to an extent. But again, you need to be transparent with the user. And if the users know what they're signing up for, and it's to their benefit, then I think so long as you're clear, you shouldn't have too much of an issue in the UK at least. It's a bit more of a grey area in the Europe.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. We have to move on to the second topic. Jingle, please.